In this video, we will talk about aggregate functions in Monet database. First, we will read from this system table, sys functions, and from here we can read a list of all of our aggregate functions, and aggregate functions have the type 3. So I will run this. This is a list of our functions. If we go to this web page, we will see that we can group these functions into 3 groups. We have arithmetic aggregate functions, we have concatenation functions, which will aggregate text into comma-separated lists or something like that. And we have statistical functions like correlation, quantile, standard deviation, and so on. Now we will create one sample table. So first I will create this table. This table will have 3 columns. First column is of integer data type, second one is a string, and the third one is interval month. And then we will place some data inside of this table. So I will use insert into statement, and at the end we can read from this table to see how our table looks like. This is our table, and I will now clean my screen. We will start with arithmetic aggregate functions. So this is my sample table, and the first function will be an average function. This function will calculate an average from the numbers in the number column, but this null value here, it will be totally ignored, just like it doesn't exist. The next function is count function. This function will use an argument star. That means that this function will return number of rows from our table, and our table has 5 rows. But we can also use this function on just one column, so I will apply it on the word column, and this time we will get the result 4, which is less than 5. And the reason for that is because this null value here inside of the word column will be ignored. Now previously we saw that system table with all of the aggregate functions, but this which we can find inside of that system table will not work. So we will just ignore this function. I will now clear my screen, and again I will show you my sample table. This is my sample table, and then we will continue with the maximum function. So we will find the maximum of the word column. Now word column is of the string data type, but if we were ordering words inside of this column alphabetically, then the last word will be 2. So that will be the maximum value, and that will be the result. And of course we can apply maximum and minimum function on the numbers. So we can apply minimum function on number column, and the result will be 2 because that is the minimum value. Next function is prod function. This function will calculate multiplication of all of the numbers from the number column. So 2 times 2 times 3 times 4 is equal to 48. We also have, of course, sum function, which will sum all of the values from the number column, and the sum of all of those values is 11. And we should remind ourselves that inside of this table we also have this interval month column. Now the values inside of that column can also be calculated as a total with sum function. So if we use sum of the interval month column, we would get the correct result, which will be 13. I will now clear my screen. We have saw that inside of our sample table we have one duplicate. So we have number 2 twice, and we also have duplicates inside of these other columns. Now if we were to use distinct keyword like in this statement, that would mean that we would totally ignore that duplicate value. So the result of this function will be 3. And 3 is average of numbers 2, 3, and 4. So null will be always ignored, and this duplicate will also be ignored. We can use distinct keyword with count. So if we count only unique words inside of the word column, we would get the result 3 because we only have 2, 3, and 4. Distinct will work with prod function. So this time we will calculate how much is 2 times 3 times 4. It will work with a sum function. So how much is 2 plus 3 plus 4? And we can also use it with the month interval data type. So we would get a number 11. I will now clean my screen. The next thing we will talk about are concatenation functions. I will jump here to this web page, and here below we have an image that will show that we can aggregate text. We can concatenate all of these strings into one list. This list will use comma as a default separator, but we can also use some other separators as well. I will now go here to this terminal. I will show us our sample table, and then we can start with the first concatenation function, and that will be function listTag. Now this function has two arguments. Second argument is a pipe, and this will be our separator, but we can omit this argument, and in that case comma will be used as a default separator, and this will be our result. A similar function is group concat. This function will this time use semicolon as a separator. I will run it, and we will get similar result. But while this listTag function is returning varchar, this function here will return a glob, so we can use it if we have a lot of strings to concatenate. There is also a function that will create a JSON array from some strings. This function is called JSON2JSON array, and it will also concatenate our values, but it will return them as a proper JSON array. We can also apply this function to JSON array on a column with numbers. So we can apply it on the number column, and then we would get a JSON list with numbers. I will now clean my screen. With concatenation functions, we can use distinct keyword to remove duplicates. We use statements like this. So we have distinct before the name of a column, then duplicates from our result will be removed. And that is why here we have only 3 values, not 4 values, because that duplicate value is removed. We can also control order of elements in our result, and for that we will use order by subclause. So we will order word column by number column, and then we will, based on that, create our concatenation. So I will run this, and we can see that we have 2, 2, 3, and 4. So we have an order that is defined by numbers. So this is how we sort numbers. So our values will be sorted just like numbers, all to their words, because this is the column that we concatenate, and this is the column by which we sort our values. We can also use order by if we specify our separator. So here I will specify that my separator is plus, and then I will use statement like this one. So now we again have our specific sort order. Now we have descending sort order, but now we also have this separator. Now when we use order by subclause, in that case we cannot use distinct keyword. I will now clean my screen. Next we will talk about some statistical functions. So this is my sample table, and then we will see how median function works. So this is median function, and it will return a value of 2. There is a similar function to this median function. It is called median average, and this function will return number 2.5. So what is the difference between these two functions? Well, let's go again to this web page, and here we can see how our functions work. If the number of the values is odd, in that case the value that is in the middle will be the result, and this will be true for both of these functions. But if the number of elements is even, in that case this first function, so median function, will find two numbers that are in the middle, and it will return the smaller one. So this will be the result. But if we were using median average function, in that case we will calculate an average of these two middle values. So we have 2 and 3 as middle values, and the average from these two values is 2.5. And that is why this function median will return 2, and function median average will return 2.5. But if we were having a column with an odd number of elements, in that case, both functions would return the same result. I will now clean my screen. The median function is just a special case of the quantile function. Now I will show you two quantile functions. First, we have quantile average. And this is quantile average function. It will return number 2.8. And we also have just the quantile function without this average suffix. That function will return a number 3. Now this function here is easy to explain. This value 3 is just rounded this value 2.8. But the question is how this function calculates this value and what does this value means. Well, let's go again to this web page, and here we will remind ourselves that when we are using median, there is 50% of the values on the left side and 50% of the values on the right side. But when we are using quantile function, we can decide how many values will be on the left side and how many on the right side. In this case, we have this second argument, and this means that on the left side we have 60% of the values and 40% of the values is on the right side. So that is the meaning of this function. But then how this value is calculated? Well, for that we will go to see one mathematical expression, this one here. Now this 4 means that we have 4 values, and this 0.6 is the value of this argument here. And then we calculate 4 minus 1 times 0.6 plus 1, and this will give us the result 2.8, and this is how this function calculates its result. I will now clean my screen. The next two functions are traditional statistical functions. First, we have a function that will calculate variance for a sample, and we also have a function that will calculate standard deviation for a sample. Now, this standard deviation here is actually a square root from this variance. So these two values are connected. And we have the same functions, but for population. For example, this function will calculate variance for the population. And again, if we take square root from that value, we would get standard deviation for population. And I will now clean my screen. And finally, we have 3 more statistical functions. First, we have covariance for a sample, and we also have covariance for population. Now, both these two functions will accept 2 arguments. First argument is a column, second argument is a column. Now, we're using columns to represent series. Now, each of the series has its own linear trend, and covariance will tell us how much those linear trends are going into the same direction. But covariance is not unit neutral, so if we calculate covariance while using kilometers or while using meters, we would get different results. So in order to have neutral units, we have to calculate correlation, and correlation is using the same function both for samples and for populations. I will now clean my screen. In this video, we will also take some time to talk about logical operators and functions. We will start with AND operator. This operator has 2 arguments, and if and only if both of those 2 arguments are true, the result will be true. Otherwise, it will be false. Then we have OR operator. This operator will return true only if at least one of its arguments is true. Then we have NOT operator. NOT operator will change the value of some boolean to its opposite value, so not true will become false and not false would become true. Then we have is null operator. This operator is useful because this is how we can check whether some value is null, and we can also use a version of this operator is not null to check whether something is not null. And these 2 operators are useful because they work with nulls, while most of the other functions and operators will either ignore nulls or they will return nulls when some of their arguments are nulls. I will now clean my screen. There are also some functions that work in the same way as operators. For example, we have AND function. It will accept 2 arguments, and only if both of them are true, we would get true. So in this case, we would get false. Then we have OR function. This function will return false because none of its arguments is true. Then we have NOT function. NOT will work the same as an operator. It will just return the opposite value from some boolean. So NOT false will return true. And there is also one function that doesn't have its operator counterpart, and that is XOR function. This function will return true only if its arguments are of the opposite value. So the first argument have to be true and the second argument have to be false. So they have to be different in order for result to be true. It is also possible that first argument is false and the second argument is true. So it is only important that they are different. And in that case, we would get true. Otherwise, we would get false.